You're listening to NYC Radio Live. I am thrilled to have the chance to speak with John Medeski. Definitely one of the most versatile and original keyboardists and pianists of our era. So, and I mean that. I mean the versatile thing, because in the last year, I've heard you in so many different contexts, and I kept getting surprised. Like heard you with the Steve Bernstein's Millennial Territory Band, and I didn't know it was you, but I was like, oh my God, who played that beautiful, like, stately blues solo? And then I realized it was you. And then same festival, Julian Lage, it was like this totally Zen thing. And then with Nels Klein going into outer space, and then of course getting, all the groove stuff. And then on the Jack DeJohnette Hudson album, I heard you doing, it wasn't exactly stride, but it had that feeling. And every time I see you, it's like there's a new card you pull out of the hat or something like that. So thanks for keep surprising.
Well, thanks. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I'm a musician. That's what I do. I like playing music, all different kinds, and I've done a lot of different. I've been doing it a long time and play a lot of different kinds of music, and I've always, just had that approach of like since I was like 11. My thing that someone told me to teach him, I was like, if someone asks you to do a gig, just say yes and then figure it out later. Just take any gig you can get to play with people as much as possible. And I sort of done that my whole life.
Wow. That's probably applicable to even beyond music, I suppose. Fake it till you make it, I suppose.
Yeah, and so I mean, in music, it's like, it's a weird thing, because when you really like examine like these masters of, just from other cultures that aren't Western cultures, it's like their approach is very different. They just play and they teach and they play with their kids and they play. It doesn't matter what level somebody's at. They play with them and they meet them where they're at, and people learn sort of from osmosis and from following, and then the few words that are shared are really powerful. It's like it's a very different approach to this, like, oh, go study music, especially now. Go to a university to study jazz. I mean, that wasn't even a thing when I was going to college. I mean, if you want, my idea was like, if I'm going to do jazz, I'm going to move to New York City and do that. If I'm going to go to music school, I'm going to study something that music schools are known for, like classical music or composition or theory or whatever. But it's interesting how things have changed like that, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what that says about jazz, but it's kind of wild. But for me, it's definitely always been about putting myself into real life, actual physical, musical experiences, not just sitting around listening to records and transcribing, because that's the thing. And people say, oh, I'm influenced by John Coltrane, because they listen to John Coltrane or transcribed a couple of his solos. But you're not influenced by John Coltrane if you didn't hang out with him and play with him. You're not really influenced by him. You've listened to his music and you studied it. That's, I'm hands-on is my thing. More and more, especially now with AI and all the craziness going on, more and more we need that just real human to human transference, that, all the things that are, beyond words, and the music is our best language that's beyond words. Math's pretty good, but not as good as music.
Well, it's been said, Leibniz said, music is the spontaneous mathematics of the soul. So is that.
I like that. That's great.
So I mean, I read that very early on, you were around a handful of greats down in Florida, Billy Higgins, Dewey, Redman, and Jaco.
Jaco was in Florida when I was in high school. I got to play with Billy Higgins when I was living in Boston, when I was in school there. There was this band that I was in that, he did some gigs with him, and Dewey Redman was also in Boston with Bob Moses, getting very lucky. But yeah, I met Jaco because I grew up in Florida, so I met him when he would return there.
And I mean, you were young. I mean, well, kind of want to back up for a second. Was it a musical family? Your folks were?
My dad played piano. He had like about a 30-minute uh routine set he could do at like a cock dinner party or something, and that was it. But they love music. They were incredibly supportive, even though I think terrified when I was, really committing myself to it. But still, 100% never discouraging, never doubting, worried and questioning sometimes, but very supportive. Yeah.
I mean, you could forgive them if they were a little worried if a teenage kid is going to spend time with Jaco. I would think was
Yeah, well, they didn't know, I mean, I was just playing. There was a club. There was actually several jazz clubs in Fort Lauderdale when I was in high school, which is pretty well like three consistent ones, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And there was one that was like a little more, I guess at that time contemporary jazz-ish. And I was in a trio with a couple of guys down there. One of them was Jocko's brother-in-law, and this other bass player who was sort of I don't know, hung out with Jaco a lot and learned from him, and played the same bass setup he did and stuff. And Jaco used to just come down and sit in. He would come in and then just take over for the whole the end of the first set, whole second set, and other people would come sit in when he was sitting in. And then I ran into him. Yeah, I ran into him a bunch of. Then we did. Then I did like some afternoon gigs down there with him playing standards, that this club was trying out that lasted for a little while. And then, yeah. And then, I mean, he actually asked me to go on tour with him. And that's when my parents stepped in and said no.
but I mean, was he as much of a wild man as he had the reputation of being later? Like, was it all there in terms
Oh,
musically?
well, this was post Weather Report. He was, yes, early wild man stages, totally.
Yeah.
And yeah, but but he was incredibly nice to me and generous and supportive, and he was also, doing, I mean, I mean, I'm sure there are many, many people with many, many Jocko stories.
Mhm.
And I believe most of them just from what I from what I saw and what I experienced. And he was just that he was a huge presence, But when it came to the music, he was really nice to me. Like he would sit down, he would like, yeah, we'd, in sound checks or whatever or stuff, he would like, sit down and he's like, hey, play me that Beethoven stuff, so because I was just playing a lot of classical music back then, and I would play something, and then he would sit down and like, play his like harmonic style, which was really beautiful. This, sort of gospel, but very contemporary, very, yeah, just incredible. Like, the way his approach to harmony. And yeah, he was I mean, I saw some pretty hardcore partying going on, but I was super straight when I was in high school. So it wasn't my thing, but I hung out with them, all those people. Because it was Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A lot of people were doing a lot of things back then, and there were a lot of jam sessions and stuff, and people were partying and stuff. But I wasn't really doing that. But I was just, I would just hang out and play with people, and but Jocko was incredibly kind to me. You know.
So, speaking about what you were talking about, this pre-AI era where everything has to be kind of gleaned from being around great musicians. The last interview I did was actually with Bob Moses, and he's full of those amazing stories of being with Eric Dolphy and Mingus
Oh yeah.
Son, and he kind of I know that generation of musicians like the Dewey Redmans, they weren't as verbose as people might be now with advice or anything, But I'm curious if any of these kind of people that you met kind of gave you put some kind of like seed in your brain, or just it said something that kind of reoriented the way you were thinking about music, or
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I sort of, I see it as like, there's certain people are natural teachers, you know,
Mhm.
and other people aren't. And a lot of really, really, really master, incredible musicians are not necessarily good teachers. It's a whole different thing. Organizing material in a way like that, it's almost like a different part of your brain, you know. And But I would say it's hard for me to pinpoint anything because it was just everybody all the time. I really put myself in just I don't know, just like listening to what people have to say, and then but always probably hearing what I want to hear out of it, but getting something from it, and you know I went to the New England Conservatory, and I had Rand Blake. And I did, was a classical major my first year, but I switched over kind of immediately the next year because I didn't. That's not what I wanted to do with my life. And I started playing with Rand Blake, working with Rand Blake, who was teaching there. But also I would use Rand, and then I would split with other teachers like Bob Moses. Would do half my lessons with like Bob Moses. When Dave Holland was there, I worked with him. And I got something from everybody, and then also everybody I ever played with. It's you know what I mean.
Mm.
It's hard to like say, oh, this was. There's not like one. There's not anything in particular that like, oh, but certain ways of it's more in, I would say, in the actual playing with people. You know, like just feeling like Billy Higgins telepathy. You know, and realizing that okay, telepathy is part of the language. It's part of the history. Like his ability to go where I was going before I went there. And drummer Alan Dawson too was in Boston at the time. He was a great drummer, and he, just things like that. I think it's more like musical experiences. You know, watching what Mick Goodrick didn't play. You know, and thinking about how to accompany. When you're playing with musicians, how to accompany them. Like, watching what people choose not to do. You know. And then you have people like Moses who had this, came up with this sort of system method to study. Rand Blake had ways of studying. When they think about it, they're also really great. You know, but a lot of it's picked up just from I think in the music itself, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like when you know, I've been working with this Senegalese drummer Abba Diop a bit lately. I played on his last record, and we played together. And I'm going to go down to Senegal with him in September. But when I see him work with musicians, I see that he is a griot, and I mean his entire ancestry, going as far back as anybody even knows, were griots. They passed, and the way that they pass the music on is like he starts playing with his kids when they're young. They play, and start showing them things, and just so there's a certain absorption of music that can't happen through our pea brains. It has to happen through our minds, our hearts, our guts, our soul. It has to come in, full throttle. It's like we can't just, and I think you hear that when musicians, you can hear musicians that, have a lot of things figured out, right? And the music's great, or it's gonna be fascinating, but you listen to maybe a simpler musician, a blues musician, and whose vocabulary is specific and less diverse, and it could go as deep as anything. It goes deeper than anything you've ever heard. So it's really hard to put it into words. I mean, that's the thing. Music is its own language. In my opinion, it's a language that expresses itself and defines itself. And yeah, I mean, I'm still part of the faction that's always trying to figure it out and explain it. But I know it's fruitless, you know.
Yeah, I know. Duke Ellington said, I think it was him. He said talking about music is like dancing about
That
architecture.
was Monk. That's
Oh,
Monk.
that's Monk. Yeah.
But I mean, and sure, you could actually dance to about architecture. I mean, I think people would say that too. But no, I mean, I think it's a great one. And
Mm.
like Leonard Bernstein said, I've been around the world, hundreds of times, and never have I seen a statue of a critic. And I think that's pretty good too.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So, all right. So you kind of, somehow, I mean, somehow you dove right into the waters, and, you're playing with all these great people and then studying. And then is the next thing that happened, you headed to New York after Boston? Is that what?
Well, I kind of moved to the woods in the Berkshires for a minute because I've always been attracted to that, and then New York just kind of sucks me in. Yeah, so I moved to New York, in
And
'91. Or actually, I moved there. I guess I moved there in '89. I was like splitting between Flatbush in Brooklyn and the Berkshires. I had two places for a total of $500 a month, and I had my country house and my city house. But then I moved to the East Village in around '91 with Chris
okay.
Wood. And Chris Wood moved in with we moved in together.
Oh, nice. And that's kind of now you're right in the thick of that downtown scene, like so many.
I was. I mean, I moved up. I live in. I'm back in the woods. I moved up,
Right.
to the sort of Woodstock area, Hudson Valley in '03.
Well, I meant now in our narrative of 1991.
Oh, now then, yes, the now that is then, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So we were in the East Village, yeah,
And is that when you're connecting with John Zorn and the rest of these downtown,
yeah, yeah,
figures?
yeah. I mean, I had, I was very lucky. This, someone who I had met in college is Raphael DeLugoff, who's the son of Art DeLugoff that started the Village Gate. And Raphael was a great piano player, and we became friends. And he had been inviting me to come do these 2 week stints at the Village Gate, duo, piano and bass. And just playing kind of sort of standard semi background music, jazz. And so like I kind of knew that I was going to have this gig a couple times a year, but so they kind of gave me the, I guess, impetus to be like, okay, it's safe to move to New York. I might survive. And yeah, I got there, and at that time I was like, I want to play jazz, and I just had these crazy experiences, epiphanies. I went to a late night jam session somewhere, and I had been starting to have these experiences in Boston, the jam sessions, but I went to a, late night jazz jam session. I don't know if it was Blue Note or Visiones or one of these places. I remember, I got up there as sort of my chant, my turn at the keyboard, and like, I don't even know what tune it was. It doesn't matter. We were playing some standard tunes or standard jazz tunes, and like basically, like the horn players were coming up and playing, and they were not like listening to anything I was playing. And worse, much worse, is they weren't even listening to the drummer. They were just playing whatever the hell they had practiced in the practice room, these patterns and all this stuff. And I remember, over and over, they kept coming up, and I remember and nobody was looking at each other, and nobody's really looking at each other while they're playing. And I was just like, okay, this is not my fantasy of jazz, and I don't know what's happened, because this is not improvising. This is not, you know, creating music together in the moment. This is not taking a great song and like doing something collectively with it that matters. It's like this is just like, somebody playing along with a freaking play along record, you know, flexing their muscles in the mirror, And it really turned me off, and it just made me just sort of question like okay, so what's happened? Is jazz becoming like a music of history, and it's no longer a relevant music? Is it now becoming like classical music? There's different eras and different styles and different ways to play, and they're very specific. And if you don't do it that way, you're not doing it. Because for me, jazz was about making music in the moment for that moment, you know, expressing yourself, with your voice, So it really kind of bummed me out. And then I ended up like, checking out, discovering the downtown New York scene. I'd heard some stuff like the Lounge Lizards, and I'd heard some things before, but then suddenly like the vitality of it just hit me, and I started going and checking out that scene. And that's when I, really got to meet Zorn, and I was out playing, and Zorn, I played with the Lounge Lizards a little bit, played with Zorn, and yeah, I just sort of gravitated. I mean, to me, that was the music that felt, even if it wasn't in a particular genre, it was people combining genres, like, putting different things together, like being honest about who they were and playing that music, not just trying to sound like something that they had heard before, or replicate something that they heard on a record. And there's people that are great at that too, which is fine, because it is nostalgic to hear somebody play some good old fashioned something. But for me, that wasn't like what I was looking for. So yeah, so I just gravitated to the downtown scene.
Yeah, and I mean, one. One thing I've been trying to wrap my head around. Well, first of all, yeah, there's so many great musicians like Thomas Chapin. There's so many great musicians from that downtown scene that you know, we could do more listening to. um,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it was great. It was funny you mentioned Thomas. Yeah, he was great. I mean, he was like back then, he was doing it, and a lot of people were, and and there was a whole era before, the late '70s and '80s of people that some amazing stuff was happening. So just learning about all that, and and also another thing back then was that the East Village was a focal point. A lot of people lived there. It was like it was still an affordable neighborhood. And then it kind of moved down to the Lower East Side, and then it definitely gentrified and evolved very quickly. And but there was something too, like going out to breakfast and running into Bern Nix and like Anthony Coleman and Rebo and like just then hanging out, having a coffee, and then going over to somebody's apartment, and yeah, I mean, I remember at Transcendent Mama was like after brunch somewhere. We went over to somebody's apartment, and Bern Nix is over in the corner picked up the guy's guitar and is playing like the most insanely beautiful and abstract version of Autumn in New York I ever heard. You know, just like in their living room, and just things like that were happening a lot. And I feel like I was really lucky to be there at that time. You know,
yeah, and one of the, I keep bringing up his name, but I'm still, and maybe everybody's like this, I'm still trying to come to grips with how prolific John Zorn is. And
good luck.
so, I mean, maybe you could provide some insight. What's going on? I mean, the guy has, I mean, it doesn't, he's the fountain of creativity is, I can't even think of any parallel.
No, I mean you could say Bach or Picasso, in terms of but he's like the volume of stuff that he does is like insane, And but he is like it's his whole life, and he's dedicated to it, and he loves it, and it's like it keeps him young. It's like it's just what he does. It's who he is. Is he is just incredibly creative and inspired, and he is also blessed with being an incredible sort of business person in a way, in the sense that he has the confidence in himself and enough of that radical, um, I don't know what you call it, rebel side, where he stands up for musicians' rights and for his rights, and he doesn't back down, you know. I mean, I've seen him do it on the road a lot, stand up for the musicians, and he's bringing there, like in ways that a lot of these musicians have never seen before, especially from a band leader, you know. And he also is very generous. He started a nonprofit to enable, creating a record company that could put out people's records that nobody else was going to put out, and finding a way to sustain it financially, and like in a way that's fair to the musicians, but also makes it possible to do it, and isn't about profit at all. It's about the people really expressing themselves. I mean, he's a force of, I don't know what, he's really incredible. And, and he, just the way he works with, music and musicians, is very, I mean, he writes a lot of music, but it's very informed by who he's writing for, you know, in the way Duke Ellington did, and a lot of musicians did that. And he, has, I think since he was young, he's just like genius like that. Since he was young, he's been questioning and exploring and reading and reformulating, concepts around music and what music is and what form is and what melody is and what, and he just pushes it, and he's very, and he's an incredible artist in his aesthetic in every way.
So like there's that Bagatelle album with the Medeski Martin and Wood trio doing some of the Masada book
That's a
and
different one. Yeah, okay. There's a
writing.
Bagatelle. The Bagatelles is with myself, Dave Fusinski, and
Oh,
Calvin Weston playing those pieces of music.
right.
And the Masada, yeah, there's a whole series of different bands playing Masada music, and Medeski Martin and Wood did one of those too.
Yeah, and so that's the one that I was just thinking of in the moment. I enjoyed both of them, but the Masada one, I mean, it's just gorgeous, and he brought something kind of very, some different things that aren't usually in the MMW book. So I'm just curious, like, when he's doing that, is he just handing over his compositions and saying go for it, or is he a little more hands-on?
Well, okay, it's not that simple. So, right, Masada, he wrote those hundreds of pieces, right? And he had his band. He had the original Masada Quartet, and then he started getting other people to play, you know, versions of that music, and different bands started playing it. In the case of Medeski Martin and Wood, he just handed us, but he curated it. He gave us a list of charts. He said, "Here, I was thinking of these for you guys. Choose from these." So we did, and we just made the record and sent it to him. He needed it with his approval, right? He didn't come and, but I've also worked with him a lot to know what what he likes, what he wants, and where he's coming from. Most of the time, and so with the Medeski Martin and Wood one, we recorded it, gave it to him, and he was happy. With the Bagatelles, however, that's a whole other story. He wrote this other series of hundreds of pieces in a totally different language, in this new sort of very kind of, I don't know, I don't know if it's atonal, but it's atonal-ish. It's his own language, and with different time signatures and different, and very complex rhythmically. But he wrote the same kind of thing, like little lead sheets that, little songs that can then be fleshed out by whoever's playing them, and so what he did then was he had a lot of different, he had different bands and put different groups together to show, or just to express the diversity that's possible with this particular body of music. And in that one, I think he probably found when people started approaching it, they weren't getting it. So he was far more hands-on in that process. He was, there were a lot of gigs at the Stones of different configurations playing this music, and he would very rigorously rehearse with everybody to make sure they were getting it right, and to explain like what what the idea was, what was behind it. So in the Bagatelles case, he was in there. He had his hands in there. And then we did a lot of tours where, there would be like 7 bands, 25 people out, doing these like Zorn festivals, each doing like a 20-minute set of Bagatelles, over the course of the night, which is really fun. And then getting to hear like, all these different people do it, like, Julian Lage and Gian Riley, acoustic guitar duo.
Wow.
My trio with Fuse and Cal, this band Trigger, solo piano. I saw Craig Taborn doing solo piano of his stuff. And so it was a real variety and diversity of, sort of lenses on this music. And it was but all sounded like this music. But Zorn was very involved in, with a lot of them to make sure they were getting it.
Yeah, it's insane to write. I think he wrote 200 of those pieces in like 2 months or something. It's up there, 300 in 2 months.
Yeah, he gets in it. He starts doing it. He just goes. I mean, I played last night with this band, Simulacrum. That's
The heavy metal thing.
Yes, it's kind of a heavy metal organ trio.
Yeah.
And we played last night opening up for Snarky Puppy at the Capitol Theater, which was kind of wild because we had just done a gig at Roulette. And I was realizing that, like, with that band, we have 10 records out.
Wow.
9 studio records that Zorn wrote, and then 1 live record, that's a lot of music for one band. But he did the first one, and he loved it, and everybody stepped up and did a great job learning the music, so it inspired him to do another, and he wrote another and another and another until we had 9. And then we started a whole other project out of that with Brian Marsala on electric piano called Chaos Magic. And we've done a bunch of records with that. And we're going to do another one in December. I mean, it's kind of like he gets on these rolls, and then he just keeps writing as long as he's inspired until he's not feeling it anymore.
Wow. Unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, is that simulacrum? Like, is that at first, was that a stretch for you aesthetically? Like, was that something that was down the middle for your taste in terms of like, the super hard
I
thumping
love
bass
I
and
loved it. It's just I've never done any. I'm
yeah.
just so happens I've never done that much, you
Hmm.
know. But I loved it. That's the thing I love about Jordan. He finds like he hears somebody and he hears a potential for something that maybe they are not going to do on their own.
So,
That is them.
that's interesting. Yeah, like very interesting, like what you're saying about Duke Ellington and Bubber Miley, and
Right.
writing for the people, Johnny Hodges, finding that part. So anyway, so back to the narrative a little bit. So it's like 1991. You're playing the Village Gate. That's the beginning of Medeski, Martin and Wood,
Yeah,
right?
I met Billy and Chris. Chris moved to New York with me. I met him in Boston. I met Billy before. I go and I play with Billy at his house, just me and him. And then Chris and I go. Then basically the Village Gate starts expanding and allowing drummers to play because they were it was more of a volume thing. They weren't. So I wanted to I say, hey, I'll just try a Billy. We'll do it with Billy. So Chris and I went over to Billy's house and he had a little recording studio set up at his place, and it was one of those like chemistry things. I mean, literally the first thing we played was Billy started a beat, Chris played a bass line, and I played, and it's like so literally the very first notes we played is I transcribed it. And it's a song on our first record called Uncle Chub on Notes from the Underground. It was like that. We just immediately started making music together, and then kind of it all went from there.
Yeah, and I mean, at first you were playing piano, but I really enjoyed when I was prepping. I was listening to that very sweet interview that you did with Marion McPartland, and you mentioned that that it felt like you were doing something new and fresh, jazz in your own way. So I'm just curious, like, what was it? I mean, that like, what was the sensibility that even though you hadn't yet moved to the organ and keys that kind of defined your sound in a lot of the ways, but something was there that like made it feel like of the moment and of the time and fresh and like alive.
Yeah, I think it was just sort of the rhythmic approach and the aesthetic approach to groove and rhythm, and what it means. What that means to the music. I think was really important that we were all kind of aligned like that, and that we weren't. It wasn't just like three guys trying to be old jazz guys.
Mm.
It was like we were trying to be ourselves, and to me, that's what everybody was always trying to do until a certain point. And now no one is, but it was like everybody's trying to be themselves, and and so it was like us just being ourselves, and I think having Billy in the mix, kind of changed it up in a certain way that we just we got in there, worked on it, and developed it, and yeah, and I think we in a way, sort of the organ kind of came in by chance, um. So there's really two simple reasons that we start. I had played B3 a lot. I was, loved, Hammond organ. Was in a blues band for a while in Boston, and just playing organ and piano too, but just playing a lot of organ. And basically, like we would go on the road. We wanted to tour, and a lot of places didn't have pianos or they had really bad pianos. So we tried to tour with a digital piano, and I just hated it. I hated using the digital piano because you don't get your own sound, and it just wasn't working. So between that, like wanting to play a real instrument and not play some like blow up doll version of an instrument, and and then we want to do a gig at the Knitting Factory, and they didn't have a piano, so I dusted off my old Korg organ, which was a little more portable, and the double manual Korg and my Leslie, and just we wrote a set of music just for that gig, and that kind of started it.
Wow. And so were you, well, once you started bringing in these, I mean, the organ and then later on, obviously this, I guess your rig, as the band gets bigger and you can afford other people to carry your stuff, soon you have like quite a, you've got the clavinet and you've got the
Well, yeah. I
mug.
mean, we had a lot of stuff when it was just the three of us,
Uh-huh.
but it did get bigger when it could. But no, I mean, kind of like it was sort of like Oregon was, the gig in the Knitting Factory was just the organ, and then immediately it was like, well, okay, if I need some kind of piano vibe, so Wurlitzer was all, kind of my favorite electric piano. Just makes me think of Ray Charles or Aretha Franklin and stuff. So I got a Whirly, and then we're traveling, and we're the guy I bought an organ from, and maybe even my Whirly down in Atlanta. I was like, "Hey, have you ever used a clavinet?" And I was like, "No." So I got a clavinet, and it was like there's our sort of it's a lot easier to buy an extra keyboard than it is to hire another musician. So it's like there's the guitar player guy when we need him. Right. And then it's expanded to the same guy. Like, hey, have you ever played a Mellotron? And I was like, no. And so then it just expanded like that. And then, yeah, I think at the peak, it was like, yeah, I had like Mellotron, real piano, Wurlitzer, ARP string ensemble. At one point, there was a lot of stuff on the stage. And Bill, it was kind of cool because, they're all, it's like, it's just colors or it made just for a greater ability to sonically orchestrate, you know?
Yeah, I'm curious as like how it's changed your ear, like especially I think you kind of had some analog synths in the mix, like a Moog at some point. I know you can.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so did that like kind of building a sound from a triangle wave up? Did that change kind of the way you're hearing things, or did that do anything?
I think it was more came in the other way. It's just like the way I'm hearing things required
Mhm.
that. I mean, I just like there's something about a lot of all these instruments that like clavinet. I there is not there. I don't. People can pretend, but there is not a digital keyboard that gives you 1/10 what a real clavinet gives you. You know, and it sounds like a recording of the clavinet, but the touch of the clavinet is like it's there's strings inside it, you know, and just making a recording of that sound, no matter how elaborate, is never going to give you what you get when you're slapping on a clav, you know. And I mean, in all honesty, there are certain things that fare better, I think, with a digital. Like, sometimes if I have no choice, it's fine. But at that time, there weren't that many people playing. Like now, everybody's playing this stuff, But in the early '90s, it wasn't. Nobody wanted to carry that stuff around, and nobody was doing it. Now they're all doing it, and now it's stuff really expensive. But like back then, I bought a clavinet for $75 Canadian. And now you can't find one for under 5,000. It's ridiculous. But that's another story.
Yeah.
So, but for me, it was always about the sound. Does the sound inspire me to make music? Because the way we approach music wasn't just like, oh, let's try to sound like Strawberry Fields, or let's try to sound like. It was like, really, let's check out this instrument and see what it can do. And not that we're all naturally informed by everything we've heard. It's out there. But for me, it's always been like, hey, what does this instrument got? And you know, these older instruments, each one like does one thing, you know, but it does it completely, and that's what it does, you know. Whereas like when you have a keyboard that's got like 5,000 sounds in it, like none of them, even the best piano sample. I mean, sure, you're not going to know the difference if it's buried in a bunch of other sounds, right? And you can get away with it. And if you're walking through a mall and there's like a piano, so you're not gonna be able to notice. But as a piano player, it's a huge difference. I mean, the piano is an amazing. I mean, I argue that it's the greatest mechanical human. It was the last and greatest mechanical human invention. I mean, it's up there with like the most advanced like clocks and stuff like that, that were non-electric. But a piano, I mean, if you think about it, like it's this instrument with these strings, and this action is very, this mechanical action is very elaborate, but every person who plays it has their own sound on it. Like a good piano player or somebody who really loves music can, in two notes, tell that that's Herbie Hancock, or that's Bill Evans, or that's Arthur Rubinstein, or that's Walter Gieseking, or that's um, Thelonious Monk, in two notes. Because the touch, it's like hearing someone's voice. The fact that this mechanical thing can do that, like, it's kind of crazy. You know, it's really wild. So my long-winded point is you can't duplicate that digitally. And I know a lot of people say, "Oh, yet maybe," but you can't duplicate. There's a certain some maybe someday, but they are far, far, far from it. Everyone sounds the same on a digital piano, the same tone, the same touch. It's there's no. So I think as a piano player, it's like it's a drag to play a digital piano. People, you do it because it's easier, it's lighter, it's in tune, it's less of a hassle, and that's true of all this stuff. And you give in, and then you actually start to lose that ability to feel and hear the difference. I see it with people playing digital keyboards. Because yeah, it's a drag that a clavinet. These things break. A Wurlitzer electric piano. The reeds break really easily, and you got to fix them, and they go out of tune. And it's just easier to have this imitation that stays in tune, and it's like just. But then that's a matter of what are your priorities. you know.
Yeah. I mean, it would be criminal to give Arthur Rubinstein like a digital piano, like that. That's worthy of arrest. It's like
Except you know what? Honestly, like, I think it's more criminal to give it to a little child, even though it's better than nothing. But like for kids, when the people that I know that have pianos, the kids it's much more engaging. And everybody's like, well, I'm just gonna get a digital keyboard. I know people that do because they don't want to deal with the piano. They don't have to get a tune. They don't have to deal with the weather and all this because they are. It's a commitment and it's a pain and it takes up a lot of space. But it's amazing to watch, like that kids who have a real piano are just more interested.
I interviewed. Do you know Chico Freeman?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So he's a very interesting guy. He's very interesting. Played with Sunrise. He did all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, Von Freeman's son, and he also is a mathematician. And he was telling me, and when I interviewed him, that when the CD was created, they had done some internal studies, and they found out that the digital process, which of course requires some kind of compromise. You're going to say, okay, we're going to do this many bits. We're going to turn this into a 0 and this into a 1. We're going to, and it'll be okay. And that digital compromise that our poor listeners are having right now because our voices are being reduced and compressed and all that. They found that it's actually damaging to the listeners, and they kind of like repressed this information that digital sound compared to an analog record, for example, where it's the wave itself is making the groove. And to your earlier point, it's like kind of your whole thing is just being with people playing like these instruments that have a soul themselves, like a clavinet has a soul, and you're doing it live in front of people, not there's no digital interference in those moments.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I want to believe that. I mean, we're gonna have to look into it but I mean, that's interesting. And yeah, I feel like, I mean, I just think more and more, it's like we need to unplug. You know, It's like, I mean, it is what it is, and it's all fine. And who really knows what's happening in human history? But there's a part of me that is really sad and discouraged by it. Even though I'm not going to stop doing it, I'm going to keep doing it. And consequently, there's a part of me that believes in it more than ever. But the part of me that's discouraged is like, you know, that yeah, people don't just go and like really hang out and listen to music and, I mean, and really take it in. It's not, it's, I mean, I used to have to, well, I'm one of these, I guess I'm an old guy. I had to, you know, every 15 minutes go and flip my record over. I couldn't just walk away for 5 hours with shit just playing constantly in some like other person's, you know, guess of what might be cool to listen to next. Or some computer's
Okay.
version. I had to, like, if I wanted to listen to 90 minutes of music, I had to make a mixtape. And then I could put it on and do that, you know. And just like, I don't know, just taking our choice out of things. And also I do believe in the random perfectness of things. So sometimes it's not about choice, sometimes it is about just what happens. But then when you got some other thing, I don't know. It's just I just feel like it hurts the music that music is everywhere and nobody really listens and nobody really cares. And little things like the background music that's just blaring at restaurants all the time as though they feel like that's what we need in order to feel like we're having fun. Or the fact that, like, when a band plays plays a gig at a show, the sound guy puts on house music like one half a second after the band stops playing. Like, oh, God forbid there's a moment of silence where you can just, you know, let what just happened settle into your system. Oh no, we got to keep it. It's like it's just so idiotic, and it's discouraging to me that people don't, and then people don't, don't. There's not an interest in, like, reconnecting to, like, I don't know, the source of things, whatever that is, nature, music, spirituality. You know, um, and that, it's hard for people to really listen to. I mean, I see young people are like, I don't often find a young person who sits down and plays a whole song for me. Check this out, and they play like 20 seconds of this. Oh, and then check out this, 20 seconds of this. And it's just like, I mean, I don't know what ADHD is. I don't know what came first. you know, I don't know, if it's the chemicals in our brain, or if just this, this incredible amount of things that are available is just so overwhelming and distracting that we can't just chill. I mean, one of the things that blew my mind when we signed with Blue Note Records, I never remember this. This is one of the reasons we went with them, because we had like 17 different record companies kind of looking at us back then. It was that era when there were actually record companies, and and I went in to see Bruce Lundvall, who was one of the last. He was a you know he was a I mean, he's a big record exec for many, many, many years, and a true music lover. And I'll tell you, I'm going to describe two different things, and I'm just going to say it because Sony Records was another one we were talking to, and we go into a meeting with them. The first thing, the guy whose name I won't mention, but you can look up that year and find out who it was like, "Hey, so you want to sell records? You guys ready to get a singer?" And I mean, I don't know what language I could use on this.
Feel free.
No, but inside I was like, "Oh my God, okay, fuck you." And we went through the meeting and left. And then the polar opposite happened with Bruce. And this is, again, it's a long way to get to this point, but I wanted to visit him, and he was like, "This is like Jason Moran's first record." He's like, "Have you heard Jason Moran record?" I was like, "No, man." He said, "Here, sit down," and he puts it on. And he's just there, like, sitting behind his desk. This is like, the president of Blue Note, who was formerly the head of Capitol. He's sitting there, and I'm sitting there and I'm listening. It's really, it's amazing. And we listened in silence to the entire record. Like, and I remember that just blew my mind. I was like, here's this guy, you know, who's like, very busy, but he loves music that much, and that he can just get lost and share this 40 minutes with somebody who's not even signed to their label yet. But you know what I mean? And it was just like, really, like, and I guess that's where, this is the part of me I said is discouraged, is like, you don't see that much anymore. I don't even do it. I got to start doing it. I'm talking about myself too. We don't have time for that. But, I just, for people to really experience things,
Mm. Well, it's a good time to pitch you this festival that I produce. It's called Raga's Live Festival. It's 24 straight hours, mostly going through the raga cycle and mostly like
Oh,
Hindustani
nice.
Carnatic music, but
Yeah, amazing.
but we stretch it too. But most people stay for the entirety, and most people don't touch their phones. And it's like a really radical, and we just put it on sale, and like we sold half the tickets without announcing the artist, because it's just like it's so the opposite of everything else, which is why
Yeah.
it took so long to get to that point. But it's year 15 or whatever. But yeah, it's like it becomes that much more sacred actually when we do the thing where we're just all in a room together and listening and sharing a moment.
Yeah, no, it's vital. It's vital. I mean, for me, it's always been important. I mean, like, that's part of the whole Medeski Martin and Wood Hawaii thing, is like to go into a place with no electricity, you know, and before cell phones and no car even at first, and just like spend, 2 months out there, living, unplugging, being away from all of that, And I still do. I do it all the time. I've been doing it. I go down. I do other things now. But like, I need, just get a couple of weeks where I'm completely off the grid. You know, just to reconnect, to remember.
Yeah. So, I mean, by the way, that's such a beautiful story about Bruce Lundvall. I mean, it's amazing. There are a lot of these great, executives behind the scenes who just change, like John Hammond, senior. These people who loved music behind the scene, who got
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
changed the whole history. So yeah, and another thing that was going on to me, like I didn't move to the city till 1999, but at that time, this I was in Harlem, and everywhere you went, hip hop was just pervasive. It was in the air. Anywhere you went, you heard it out the windows and out of cars, and I felt like Medeski Martin and Wood, were improvising and they're playing really in and they're playing really out, but it had that like sensibility, that New York sensibility, and it made it, that's why I really connected with that music at that time. Like it just felt like this is what we should be doing.
yeah. I mean, it was yeah. I mean, hip hop was I mean, I guess obviously it's an influence on the entire planet and culture of the human beings. But for us, it was a huge. It was. I mean, hip hop. I mean, there was stuff happening before in the '80s. There was stuff happening.
That's for sure.
And like a lot. And so for us, it was like already happening, and we loved it, and we listened to a lot of it together. And there's something I guess to try to describe it other than it was happening, and we embraced it, and it was a big part of our everything in addition to all the other stuff we loved. But it was huge because it was what was happening. And for me, there was something about the beat, the rhythm of a lot of hip hop. It kind of started with the go-go scene, where
Mm.
it was almost a more swinging type of beat, you know, and hip hop really took that to another level. And for me, in a weird way, like there was something about the linear improvisation that is sort of jazz inspired that worked better over that beat, which because when you think about jazz is coming from a very a swinging eighth note. And of course, there's a lot of different, you get into that. There's a lot of different swings. There's the Brazilian swing. There's different cultures that have different swings where, how they deal with that triplety eighth note thing is the feel is subtly different. The push and pull between, straight and swung. That's a whole other study. But hip hop had this thing that just was so inviting to play lines over for me much more than a lot of the rock fusion type of stuff that ultimately, at the end of the day, would often sound corny to me. With and as amazing as all this stuff was, and as much as I was listened to it as a kid, as influenced by it, at a certain point, it just felt very macho and corny and technically amazing, but it would end up losing what I loved about James Brown, or what I loved about with all the complicated stuff, with all the complicated melodies and notes and fancy harmonies. It would lose that thing of being on one chord and just repeating the same thing over and over, which is what groove is about. And somehow hip hop really played with those two things, and still does, brought in this like repetitive groove, but then through the way, with using samples and the way things were arranged, and that anything could go with anything if it sounds good and fits, was so inspiring. That if it works, it works. And the idea of like pulling unexpected elements on things you haven't heard, or using things you've heard in the way you didn't imagine. All that. So every element of the hip hop, and even like the rhythm of the rappers themselves, the way they would rhyme, the rhythms of the rhymes, certain ones would, are very impactful for or for me as an improvising musician.
Yeah, and Billy, we spoke recently too, and what he does with taking all these different shades of like Clyde Stubblefield and Jabo Starks and those James Brown people, and dancing around them, and to be so inventive within the limitations of that backbeat. It's like it always amazes me how he can keep it fresh and keep like finding new variations and
Yeah, that was the thing that I heard when I first heard Billy. Because he was not that's what I was saying about, he wasn't a straight ahead jazz drummer, but he was creative and had that, he had that sensibility of creating and inventing, but with the core of it being, hip hop, funky drums and Brazilian beats, just like really, it was a really cool combination.
And I just think of great drummers. In a week, we're celebrating Jack DeJohnette, and that Hudson album. It's just gorgeous. And I don't know. I mean, a couple of things I heard just re-listening to that album. One, I've always thought there's nothing more beautiful than Jack DeJohnette's ride cymbal. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Yeah. But a few other thoughts were just. Well, one, I don't know how much you remember the album, but the opening track, Jack is doing that swampy Bitches Brew type thing, and you're like right there on some kind of distorted organ, and it's like I felt that vibe kind of percolating back, that voodoo swampy thing. And then it was very funny talking to Scofield about that album, because he said, hey man, he's like, Medeski and John, and Jack, he's like, they're a lot more adventurous than I am, so they'd be like going crazy, and I'm like, we're gonna lose, the wheels are gonna fall off the bus. And it was funny because I actually heard it before he even said that. Like, there was one track where it felt like he's like, nope, I'm not letting this thing go, and he's just holding it. I don't know if it was A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall or one of them, but like and of course it turns so magical because you guys are like playing with abandon, and he's like holding the he's holding the center. Anyway, I just love to hear you.
Oh, that's funny. I never heard that from him, but that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, Jack is ready to go all the way, every moment. It's kind of wild. He was really, it was really an honor for me. I mean, I grew up, he's one of my heroes in the fabric of music for me, So I never imagined I would play with him. So having that opportunity was really special. Anyways, and then we did a little touring, which was really fun, hanging out with him, and the stories, the hang, the like, he just was really a very still searching and growing guy, which is really kind of amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know I think his mother wrote the lyrics to Stormy Monday? It's like crazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. There's all kinds of weird. I interviewed him a million years ago. Like, that was one of the things. Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting kind of history. And
I didn't know that. Well, he'd love to sing.
Yeah. He sings on that album.
Well, he sings on the album, which was, because I always heard stories of him like singing in sound checks with people, like sound checking and singing like a band tune or something. And then we actually pulled it out for the record, which was cool. And yeah, he would sing sometimes the sound checks, and there's some funny stuff in the van with him and Scofield trading like bebop solos. The two of them go to play. It was like, it was really fun. It was definitely really funny and fun. And but he was like in a doo-wop band like early in his life. He's saying that was one of the first musical things he had.
Yeah, it was so long ago, but I think he sat in with T-Bone Walker as a child. I have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure. Like, and like the whole band played, came in with the hit after he, and he was like shocked, But
well, that's amazing.
Yeah,
he was, one of the greatest, definitely of our lifetime.
Yeah,
and more lifetimes.
And this new project with Julian Lage, and I feel that people are going to look back at this particular quartet with you and Jorge and Kenny. I think people are going to say this is a classic quartet. I mean, there's something special going on.
It's definitely there's definitely a chemistry there that was, for me, that's a lot of everything. It's not a lot of everything. It is everything. Because you can put like the greatest musicians together, and it doesn't mean it's going to work, just because they're all really good. And Julian and I've been wanting to talk about doing something for a while, and I don't know, this is kind of what evolved, and it's really fun. It's really easy, even though the music's not necessarily easy, but it's just so natural, I guess is a better word than easy. This band together, and it's really we had quite a few little tours coming up over the next month, so I'm really excited. I love it.
And he has an interesting approach, right, as a band leader, and how he led that album.
In what way?
Well, I read some interview that he kind of just thought about, the musicians and just wrote a piece in 20 minutes and then recorded it. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, confusing.
Well, no, I think he did write all the music maybe pretty quickly, but we had all the music ahead of time. We rehearsed a little bit, and then we got in there. But it was all very quick and easy. Like, we didn't. There's I don't think there's more than 2 takes for anything.
Yeah, I think it was.
I don't even know if we always went with the first or second take, but it just all happened very quickly and easily, and But it's it's really, these guys are all great musicians. So.
Yeah, different contexts. Well, I'm just checking. You have so many cool projects. I mean, the Sun Ra thing, and we'd run out of breath and time to run through.
Well, we can do it again.
Yeah, I'd love to. I was saying it'd be fun to actually do something. I'm in Woodstock, actually, so it'd be fun to do it in person and
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, do something with. Yeah.
So you're in Woodstock right now. Is where you're doing it?
Yep.
Oh yeah, come over there. I'll see you in Woodstock.
Appreciate your time. Yeah, I'll see you actually in a week. I'll be at the Jaco Pastorius tribute. So
yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Okay, nice to see you. Thanks. Okay, talk to you later. Bye. Peace.